Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome to episode 364 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all the places at Hawk Blogger. And yes, it is the penultimate day before we hit 365 tomorrow. I am really appreciative, at least so far, that the weather looks like we're gonna get a 70-degree day tomorrow in Seattle. So I'm hoping to do the show tomorrow and then get out and play some golf and enjoy the day. I hope you guys have some plans to maybe play hooky from work. You know, maybe you got a little bit of a cough or whatever, and get outside and enjoy the weather, because it has been a just rainy mess for a while, and it looks like it's going to stay that way. Last year around this time, it was a pretty dry March into April. I remember it because I was outside a bunch, and that is not the case this year. We have plenty of wet weather, so tomorrow, going to try to get out there and enjoy a little bit of the sunshine, assuming we get it. And really cool to see. Everybody's been taking advantage of the new promo that we're doing with JK Boots. And again, tomorrow for episode 365, we'll have some giveaways from JK Boots. Hoping to have some giveaways from Pagliacci Pizza as well. So make sure you tune into that episode, because you got to attend if you want to get some of the giveaways. But we've got a new promo for JK Boots. If you use code HawkBlogger, you get $75 off. Flat $75 off, which is a crazy deal. And for every sale that you use code HawkBlogger, we're also giving away $15 to the Wildland Firefighters Foundation to help protect Northwest Forest from fire. It's just a great deal all around. The best boots I've ever had. I think they'll be the best boots you ever own. Washington company, Spokane based. Go in there, take advantage while we're doing this. Code HawkBlogger gets you $75 off. $15 goes to the Wildland Firefighters Foundation. So great stuff there. And as I said yesterday, we passed 17,000 subscribers, which is also really cool. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, today I wanted to kind of take a moment to walk down the dark side. Like, we spend a lot of time dreaming of who we could get and what are the players that could be available to the Seahawks at the 18th pick. Well, the reality is the Seahawks don't have the first pick. They don't have the second pick. They don't have a top 10 pick. They don't even have a top half of the draft pick. It's not in the top 16. They're at 18. So they're at the mercy of many other teams ahead of them. And I thought it would be a good time for us to take a moment to kind of figure out which of these teams might take your favorite player before that guy falls to the Seahawks. So Den of Thieves, I guess, is the kind of theme of the show today. We're going to go through the teams ahead of the Seahawks in the draft order, kind of take some guesses about, based off their needs, where they might go and how that could affect the Seahawks' fortune. So don't expect this to take too long, to be honest, but I wanted to take some time to do it. So that's what we're going to do. And I appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope you're all having a wonderful start to your week and a happy Monday morning. All right. So let's get into it. Let's get into it. First, I've got the draft order here, and I'm going to kind of make a pass through here, just talking about which teams may be interested in adding offensive line help. And obviously there's other ways the Seahawks can go with pick 18, but I think we can all agree that offensive line is the Seahawks' biggest need, and having the maximum number of choices of who they could pick at 18 for offensive line would be ideal. So let's see who are the teams that have the biggest needs that might take those positions. And we're going to look at offensive tackle and interior offensive line, because a number of the offensive tackles can both play tackle and guard. And so we'll take a look at that. And part of the way we're going to determine what these teams' needs are is NFL Mock Draft Database does a kind of a cool thing where they actually compile team needs based off the frequency in which they appear in a mock draft for a specific team. So I think that that's one way to look. There are also team-based mock drafts where you can see what are the team-based sites picking for their own, not the the franchise-based sites, but like the fan-dedicated sites like SB Nation, things like that. Who are they picking to go to their team in the first round? So we can kind of look at that as well as another way to kind of triangulate. And so let's start with the simple here. Let's start with the simple and go off of team needs. So from the top of the draft, Tennessee Titans, their first need, we're going to basically say we're only going to mark it off if their first or second need is listed as either offensive tackle or interior offensive line. And while the Titans certainly could use help in those spots, that is not one of their top 4 needs, at least based off of NFL mock draft database. I also may go and look at some other things like where did these teams finish in offensive line rankings and where are their players and stuff like that. But we'll just do a first quick pass. So Tennessee does not get a check for either offensive tackle or interior offensive line. So that's good. They can have Cam Ward. Cool. Enjoy. We'll keep going. The next on the list is the Cleveland Browns. And again, offensive tackle, interior offensive line is not one of the first 4 listed needs for the Browns. Now, I'm not sure I totally agree with that. We can come back to it, but not surprised that, we get to pick number 2. Still, so far so good for the Seahawks. Not a big area of need so far. Now, we get to pick number 3. All right, the New York Giants. And what do we get here? For the New York Giants, they have quarterback, cornerback, edge as their top 3 needs, but then offensive tackle shows up as their 4th need. So we're gonna put an X here. This is a chance that the New York Giants. There's a chance that the New York Giants could decide that they want to get a new left tackle, or a new, if Andrew Thomas, maybe a new right tackle, and that they want to build that way. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but we'll put it up there for now, and we'll come back. Next, the New England Patriots. And this is where I think it really starts. The New England Patriots, their top need, listed at least by NFL mock draft database, based off of the frequency of picks made for this team at that specific spot, offensive tackle. And this is the first, I think, realistic spot you could see a player like Armand Membu, a player like Will Campbell go off the board. I'm not sure it's the most likely outcome. The way things are trending, we could see 2 quarterbacks taken in the first 3 picks. And if 2 quarterbacks are taken in the first 3 picks, that means one thing is true. Either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter will be there for the Patriots at 4. And if that's the case, they will take one of those 2 guys. And so that will push down offensive tackle even further, which is good. We want that. But there is a possibility that both of those guys are gone and that a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders is there and the Patriots would not take another quarterback. And that could mean that offensive tackle becomes the most likely pick for the Patriots. So I think this is probably the most realistic place. In fact, I feel so confident about that, I'm going to remove this X from the Giants. I think the Patriots are the first place where you really could see a tackle selected. All right? Let's keep going. The Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars. The most forgettable team in the NFL. I'm telling you, I forget they exist all the time. And I did make a comment at their expense during the offseason when everybody on the national beat was talking about the Liam Cohen, drama that he had said no, and then he was back. And I was like, I don't even think Jaguars fans care about this as much as national media cares. And oh boy, did I get, 150 replies from Jags fans who had posted it on some subreddit. It might be the whole 150 Jaguars fans in existence all contacted me that day. But in any event, the Jaguars do exist, at least for now. And they do have a lot of needs. And their first two needs are not listed as tackle or interior offensive line. And what tends to be the most common pick to the Jaguars at 5 is Mason Graham. I think that's a possibility. I think that they could also, there is some conversation that they are looking to move Trayvon Walker, one of their edge players. So maybe there's an edge player that they're interested in. They could go cornerback, is another position that they could draft if they really like Will Johnson. The Jags are a little bit of a wild card, but I think the best bet right now is that they would go defensive line. And so this is probably the most likely place that the first defensive lineman comes off the board. There's some controversy about Mason Graham. There are some folks that say that, I think Dane Brugler has said that teams may not be as high on Mason Graham as the general analyst public is. But at this point, we're focusing specifically on offensive line, offensive tackles, interior offensive line. Jaguars do not seem like the likely landing spot there. So let's go to Mr. Pete Carroll. Mr. Pete Carroll at number 6. And Pete Carroll, everybody is assuming running back. And I don't know. Ashton Genty is the most commonly mocked player to the Raiders at this spot. I don't know that I believe that. I think that if you look at the Raiders, I think it's absolutely possible that they could, one, if a quarterback slips, if Shedeur Sanders comes down, I think that's a possibility. I do think wide receiver is a possibility, but that would not be the most Pete Carroll-ish move. I feel like offensive line is a bigger possibility here than people are giving it credit for. And if I go and I look at the Raiders and I look at their offensive line, you've got Colton Miller, who is very good. And then you've got DJ Glaze as your other tackle. And he was a rookie last year. He was picked in the 3rd round. I think he honestly looks to me more like a better guard than a tackle. And if Armand Membu's sitting there, I think that would make a ton of sense for the Raiders to look at a guy like Membu, because everyone just assumes Pete Carroll likes to run. So Pete Carroll's going to draft a running back. Pete Carroll likes to run, and the first pick he ever made in Seattle with John Schneider was an offensive tackle. Because guess what? Those are pretty important when you want to run the ball. So I'm going to go against what I'm seeing in NFL mock draft database here and say that I absolutely think that this is a place that a guy like Armand Membu could go. Pete Carroll, when he supplied his running backs for the Seahawks, yes, they got a 1st-round running back in Marshawn Lynch, but they traded a 4th-round pick for him from the Bills. Yes, they eventually got a 1st-round pick at running back in Rashad Penny, but they also, Pete Carroll's, one of his favorite backs he ever selected was Chris Carson in the 7th round. So I think people are maybe oversimplifying things with the Raiders, and I would bet that Armand Membu is a real possibility to come off the board at 6 for the Raiders. Now, the Jets. The Jets are a kind of a no question situation. They are a team that absolutely has need at offensive tackle. And so if Membu is not gone to the Raiders, I would expect him or Will Campbell to be gone after that to the Jets. Okay? And as we continue this march through, we get to Carolina. And the Panthers are another team that does not have offensive line listed. They've spent a decent amount on interior. They got Damian Lewis, they got Robert Jones. So I think we're pretty safe to move on from Carolina right now. I think they have other needs that they need to address before they get to offensive line. That brings us to the Saints. And if we look at the Saints drafted a offensive tackle early last year, Talisi Fuaga. They also, I'm going to pull this up for a second, make sure I've got this right. The Saints' other tackle that got a lot of play was Trevor Penning. And I just don't know that, like, people are listing them as not having tackle as a big need. And I'm like, really? Trevor Penning is the guy that you're feeling is a lock? I don't think so. I think part of it is the Saints really have needs at other positions. They have needs on defense. Cameron Jordan's not going to live forever, or at least he's not going to play forever. Probably both. I think you could potentially see quarterback, even though they've got Derek Carr for the foreseeable future. Wide receivers listed as a high need for them, and that's kind of surprising to me, to be honest. I mean, yes, you've got, I mean, Chris Olave was injured last year, but he's pretty good. And you've got Rashid Shaheed. I don't know that I see wide receiver being like one of the top needs for this team, but it is listed as the second most common need. Cornerbacks, they've got some defensive needs for sure, but I could see them going offensive tackle. I don't think it's crazy. So I'm going to at least put, let's do this. I'm going to put a slash there. At least a possibility that the Saints also go tackle. Now, I don't think interior offensive lines is big of a need there. But it is a possibility. All right, so then let's take a look at the Chicago Bears. And this is the team that is having the offseason, and I think a lot of Seahawks fans wish Seattle was having, which is they have traded already for 2 guards. They have signed the top free agent center. They already have a decent tackle. Now, the most commonly mocked position to the Bears at 10, offensive tackle. So this is where you're starting to get this run of teams that could absolutely be looking to take an offensive tackle off the board. If I'm the Bears, if I'm Ben Johnson, I'm like, if Armand Membu or Will Campbell's there, I am snagging that guy. Now, maybe they like Josh Simmons better than they like Will Campbell. I think that's a possibility. Maybe there's one of these other tackles. Maybe they like Kelvin Banks better than they like Will Campbell. But I think most likely 10 is the spot where any fall for a player like Armand Membu or Will Campbell probably ends. Because I think the Bears have a chance to completely make over their offensive line and set up their whole team to be a better group by really solidifying that unit. Now, they definitely could go other directions. This could be a spot to add Ashton Genty. Like, they've got the receivers, add the playmaking running back to take a little bit of pressure off of Caleb Williams. I think that's possible. They definitely have need at that position. But something about the way the Bears are going about their offseason makes me think if they can get a tackle to fall to them, I think that's probably where they'll go. So let's keep going. The dreaded, hated, Super Bowl ringless San Francisco 49ers for at least the last 30 years. Pick at number 11. And we know their needs. I could look at them. I'm curious what NFL Mock Draft Database says, but I don't really care because we know it better than any draft system. It does wisely list offensive tackle as their top need. And I think that's the smartest move for the 49ers to make. but their draft history says otherwise. And interestingly here, they have edge and defensive line as the third and fourth need. To me, defensive line is their number one need, based off of the way that the 49ers have drafted. Whenever they've had a top 10 to 15 pick with this front office, they've always gone defensive line, always. So this is where I think if Mason Graham's fallen, you could see him. I think you maybe could see a surprise pick like, a James Pierce or a Mike Green. The interesting right now, the consensus pick to them is Jahdae Barron, the corner. I would love it if they did that. Like, get a little guy, do it. But I think that this is at least an X, that it's a possible that they could go offensive line. If a guy like Armand Membu were to slip, which I just think is 0% chance, I don't think the 49ers pass on him. Will Campbell, I don't think they pass on him, but I think they'll also be looking potentially at some of these defensive linemen. If they go cornerback, hell yes. If they go safety, awesome. I think the other thing that they could go here that's not really listed very high on this needs is Jahad Campbell. Like, Jahad Campbell screams 49ers linebacker. And you put him next to Fred Warner, I think they are as good or better as they had been with Dre Greenlaw. So I think that is a sneaky pick here for the 49ers. But the reality is we cannot ignore offensive line could absolutely be what they decide to take. All right. So let's continue our march. The Dallas Cowboys, who once had the most feared offensive line in the NFL. Their needs are listed as running back, wide receiver, and then offensive tackle. And if we look at the Cowboys roster, you look at what they have as far as their tackle situation. They have Tyler Guyton, who they drafted in the first round last year, and Terrence Steele. Terrence Steele was an undrafted free agent. He's an okay player. I don't understand why offensive tackle wouldn't be a much higher need for them. They also lost Zach Martin to retirement, and they don't have a great replacement. They've got Cooper Beebe and Tyler Smith inside, but they're still missing a guard. So for me, even though this is not listed, I think, one, offensive tackle is absolutely a need. I'm going to put interior offensive line as a need. I think this is the first place where you could see a team, draft a guard. Like maybe Tyler Booker is a fit for them. Maybe if they like Gray Zabel better, maybe it's a Gray Zabel. This is the first team for me where you could see an interior player get snaked off the board from Seattle. All right. So I don't think any of the teams ahead of this makes sense to potentially steal a guard, like a more clear guard prospect. The Dolphins at 13. The Dolphins at 13 have offensive tackle as their top need. And as you look at the Dolphins, this is a team that has Teron Armstead, who may be retiring soon, and Kendall Lamb. So there is absolutely need for them there. The most commonly mocked player to the Dolphins is Kelvin Banks. So we're getting to the point here where, roughly speaking, the top three linemen are Armand Membu, Will Campbell, and Kelvin Banks. And in fact, if you look at FanDuel and the current betting odds for the first offensive lineman drafted. The betting favorite is Armand Membu, -180. Then it's Will Campbell at +200, so a pretty big difference. Then Kelvin Banks, +650. Then Josh Simmons, +5,000. Then Gray Zabel, who's also +5,000. Then Tyler Booker at +7,500. So if you get that as a rough order, first three linemen are likely to be Membu, Campbell, and Banks, at least by betting odds. Pretty heavily favored to be one of those three. And then we have this pivot point, whether Josh Simmons or Gray Zabel or Tyler Booker would be the next offensive lineman to go. And Josh Simmons is a guy that very much profiles more as a tackle than a guard. And so you hope a team like any of these teams ahead picks Josh Simmons and that they decide that he should be their guy, because that makes sure that the Seahawks will have their pick of the litter on the interior offensive line, or that someone picks Tyler Booker, who increasingly I think people are recognizing is not a good fit for the zone blocking scheme that Clint Kubiak and John Benton run. Okay. So let's take a look at who comes next. The Indianapolis Colts. Well, just about every mock has Tyler Warren going to the Colts here. And, you know, if that's one of your favorite players, which I think he is for a lot of us, this is where it starts to feel unlikely that he's available. But it's also interesting. I mean, I think Tyler Warren could go all the way as high as the Jets. I don't think it's crazy that he'd go to Carolina. I think New Orleans, like there's a lot of teams that would make sense for Tyler Warren. But for the Colts, this is where interior offensive line is another possibility. I think this is the other team that I'd put. And why is that? Well, if you hadn't heard, the Colts lost Will Fries, their starting guard. And they also lost Ryan Kelly, their starting center. Now, they have Tanner Bordolini, who is a young center, and I think they feel good about him. Matt Gonsalves, I think is how you pronounce his name, is a guy that's played tackle that I think they're going to move inside to guard. So I don't know that this is like a key need for them, but it is a place that they could go. And it's worth noting, you know, they have put a lot of investment in offensive line over the years, and they might do it again. For my money here, I don't see this as a clear need on the tackle side. I'm going to at least put a slash here for interior offensive line as something that they might benefit from. Okay. Atlanta, next on the list. Where are the Falcons and what do they need? Well, the Falcons really need defense. I don't think offensive line is the most likely place for them to go. They really need cornerback, linebacker, edge, safety, like everything on the defense is what they need. So I think we can, for the first time in a little while, skip a team. Then we get to Arizona. And Arizona, let me tell you guys, Arizona is absolutely a team that could look to add to the interior offensive line. I think they feel okay, and depending on what happens, whether they re-sign Will Hernandez, they've got Holte Froholt, their center, is a good player. Evan Brown, they brought back, who's a starting guard. Paris Johnson and Jonah Williams are fine at tackle. And then they also brought back Kelvin Beachum as a swing tackle. And then they've got Isaiah Adams as a young guard. So they could go guard here, but it just feels like this. I think this is a little bit of a smokescreen. I think that the Cardinals almost certainly are going to go defense, right? Edge, I can see James Pierce, Mike Green, Michael Williams, pick your like Shamar Stewart. I could see a lot of those guys going to the Cardinals before they go offensive line. I'm going to leave offensive line off for the Cardinals. I just don't think that this is the direction they're going to go. There's too clear of a need for them to go defensive side of the ball. So I just don't think that they are as much of a threat to steal something from the Seahawks. Which brings us to our final team that picks before Seattle, the Cincinnati Bengals. And yeah, the Bengals have needs here. They definitely do. The Bengals offensive line is a mess pretty much across the board. I don't know that there's any player on that offensive line that you feel good about. And so you could say tackle is a need, interior offensive line's a need, and maybe fortunately for Seahawks fans, Bengals have other needs too. Their defense was a bit like their offense performed pretty damn well despite that terrible offensive line. The defense, not so great. They need edge talent. They need defensive line talent. They need safety talent, cornerback talent. The most common player mocked to the Bengals at 16 is Michael Williams. And by the way, James Pierce. James Pierce is the most commonly mocked to the Bengals. Michael Williams is most commonly mocked to the Cardinals. Mike Green is most commonly mocked to the Falcons. So you see this run on edge players, at least based off consensus mocks. And even though, for me, I would look at the Bengals and say, my God, you got to draft an offensive lineman if there's one you like. I think it makes sense that they could absolutely look at defensive line as their top need. So as we kind of scroll back and look at this situation, this is what I see. Let's bring this a little bit back into broader view. All right. I think that most likely the Patriots are going to end up with Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, and that'll push down either Will Campbell or Armand Membu, whoever they would potentially pick otherwise. I think the Raiders are another pivot point. Everyone's assuming it's Ashton Genty at this point, but I'm not so convinced. I think that Armand Membu is my best guess of who's going to go to the Raiders, but who knows? Like, we gotta see as time progresses. To me, it's really silly when you've got a running back draft that's this deep to spend a top 6 pick on a running back, even as good as Ashton Genty is, when you got that many holes on your roster, feels like a really bad decision. But let's hope they make it. Let's hope Seahawks fans should be cheering for Shedeur Sanders, for Mason Graham, for Jahdae Barron, for Josh Simmons, Matthew Golden, Mike Green. Push all of those guys up the board. Push them all up the board. And that will push guys down that the Seahawks would rather have anyway. I think with the Jets, that's where you're getting from maybe they could take an offensive lineman to they will probably take an offensive lineman, unless for some reason, Membu and Campbell are gone. Maybe they would then go a Tyler Warren or go a different direction. They could go wide receiver. They could go Tet McMillan. Right now, the most commonly mocked player to the Jets is Armand Membu. Jalen Walker's another name that Seahawks fans should want to be going, push that up the board as much as possible. Then you get to the Saints, and the most commonly mocked player to the Saints right now is Tet McMillan, the wide receiver. But I think there's a lot of variance on what the Saints are going to do. I think there's at least a chance they go tackle. I don't think Trevor Penning's their answer forever. For the Bears, the most commonly mocked player is Will Campbell. So people are seeing the same possibility I think I am, which is I think the Bears in their ideal world would have one of these tackles fall to them so they could kind of complete this offensive line makeover that they've taken on this offseason. But there's a decent chance both those guys are gone unless they feel good about Josh Simmons, which would be awesome. Then they'll probably go defensive line. I could see them going, if Mason Graham's there, if maybe they'd go Kenneth Grant. But there's a lot of possibilities of what they could do on the defensive side of the ball because I think they want to make sure that they're going there. I think Ashton Genty is a possibility at 10. I do. If the other offensive linemen are snaked in front of them, I think adding Ashton Genty to that backfield could make sense. So that's another thing you'd cheer for. The 49ers are, I think I'm counting on to some extent their history there. And when they've been up high, they've gone for defensive linemen. I think that's most likely like an edge player or a defensive tackle is probably most likely. They could go secondary, like is commonly mocked. Jahdae Barron as the most commonly mocked player to them, but I think Jahad Campbell to me is the most logical pick, the best confluence of talent and need for that 49ers team. Like it's almost hard for me not to see them not going that direction. They could also trade out of that, add some more picks. They're clearly trying to restock the shelves, so to speak. So who knows? There might be another team that decides to jump into that spot, but most teams don't trade up for, into top 11 picks for a non-quarterback. The Cowboys, they definitely have needs on the offensive line. Right now, the most commonly mocked player to them is Matthew Golden, the receiver. Hell yes. Take all the receivers you guys want ahead of the Seahawks. Let's do it. You guys absolutely get more receivers. Then the Dolphins, here's the place where another offensive lineman becomes the most commonly mocked player, Kelvin Banks. Then the Colts, who Tyler Warren is the likely outcome, but if Tyler Warren's gone, do they go Colston Loveland? Do they go interior offensive line after they lost Will Fries and Ryan Kelly? It's possible. From there, I think you really drop down to Cincinnati as the next most likely place. But as I look at this overall, my general feel is Armand Membu, Will Campbell are pipe dreams. Unlikely. I think Kelvin Banks is at least a 50-50 shot to be available to the Seahawks when they pick at 18. And I think it's pretty unlikely that a team is going to pick an interior offensive lineman ahead of the Seahawks. And if they do, it wouldn't shock me if it's a Tyler Booker pick as opposed to a Gray Zabel or a Donovan Jackson or one of these other guys that I think makes sense for the Seahawks. So there's a few teams that could, snake Seattle, steal a player that you really want. But I think for the most part, Seattle's going to have kind of the pick of the litter of interior offensive linemen if that's what they want at 18, to the point where it's going to be very appealing to try to trade back. Don't know that there's going to be a team that wants to jump into that spot, but I think they'll definitely have an opportunity to trade back and still get one of these guys that they really like. I did not look in this particular episode at, Nikim and Wari, Shamar Stewart, some of these other names that we've talked about quite a bit about why they would be potential picks for Seattle at 18. There's certainly a number of these guys that could be chosen ahead of Seattle. Shamar Stewart, by some mocks, is a top 10 player. Nikim and Wari is top 15 player in some of these mocks that are coming out now. So any of that's possible. But there's what seems pretty certain is there's going to be a very healthy selection of quality players available to the Seahawks at 18. And as we've continued to say, I think we're going to have to be really dependent that John Schneider makes the right call and that they add a really good player to this team. And at this point, you know, it would be surprising to me if it's not an offensive lineman, the way this offseason has gone, the way free agency has gone. But um, uh, that's kind of the direction things are headed, I think, for Seattle this offseason. Folks, if you haven't already, please make sure you like the show, click subscribe, join over at patreon.com/hawkblogger. That's where you get all the ad-free audio versions of this pod available. And consider, if you haven't already, going to join as a YouTube member. As a club level member, you get access to our Discord channel, club level and higher on YouTube, or any patreon.com/hawkblogger member gets access to the Discord channel. Hundreds of folks in there talking Seahawks, talking sports all the time. Great place to kind of get curated information about what's going on relative to the Seahawks without having to comb through everything in Twitter or wherever else. So join up there. Instructions for how to join are on the community tab on the YouTube channel. They are given to you when you join at patreon.com/hawkblogger. There's instructions there for how to connect your Patreon account or your YouTube account with your Discord account. And then you'll get automatically invited to the Discord channel. And it's a lot of fun over there. So I'd love to see you. Let me check out Super Chats here. Colin Lundstrom says, good morning, HB fam. Appreciate you all. Well, Colin, thank you, man. Good morning to you. You certainly are appreciated. Chris Rude. Good to hear from you, Chris. Been a member for 3 months. Good morning, Seahawks fans. Good morning to you. I hope, I think you moved over to Europe. Hopefully that's going well for you and Sarah. Super Sauce XL says, how confident do you think John Schneider, Mike McDonald are in Abe Lucas? I think they're confident to the point that they expect him to be their starting right tackle and they expect him to be good, and that should he demonstrate that he can play a whole season, I think they'll extend him. I don't think he's a player that they can extend ahead of the season, although that's probably the best way to get him at a bargain deal. The more certainty you have that he is healthy and good, the higher his price. The less certainty, the lower the price. And so this is the kind of dance you do as a front office decision maker is, do I buy low with more risk, or do I wait until there's lower risk and pay the price for that confidence that I now have? And so in the Abe Lucas situation, I think it's actually wise to wait. There's been enough issue that I think you want to see it for the full season. But assuming he does what I think he's going to do, he could be very expensive. Like, Abe Lucas has the potential to be the best offensive lineman on this team. And I think he has the potential to be one of the best right tackles in football. Those are spendy. And we'll see. We'll see. So far, so good this offseason, but let's see. He's got to prove it, and he's got to be able to stay in there once the season begins. Gingerbread Man says, good morning, Brian. Well, good morning to you. He says, been really enjoying spending my mornings listening to you. Good way to start the morning. Well, that makes me happy because, 66 days ago, I guess it would be, I started this show specifically with that in mind. This is kind of the dog days where, the Mariners and Major League Baseball is about to start. There's free agency is kind of dead. There's not a lot to talk about around the Seahawks. And so people aren't on sports radio. They aren't talking about the Seahawks as much. You can't find as much Seahawks content. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go on here every day in the morning because I'm a morning person, and I'm going to give people something to listen to about the Seahawks while they're working out, while they're on their morning commute, whatever. And it's always going to have some Seahawks content to it. It's not always going to be the best, most fascinating thing out there, but I think we've done pretty well for 364 straight days of providing, most of those, I think almost all of those shows I'm pretty proud of, that there's worthwhile things that we covered. And we're going to continue tomorrow. Tomorrow we get to bring on Sam Monson of the 33rd team. I'm going to hopefully see if I can bring on some other people, but can't promise who that will be at this point. I'm going to have some giveaways tomorrow. Looking forward to that. And who knows what else. So make sure you tune in for episode 365 tomorrow. It will be awesome. Got another super chat here from Sully V. Says, what's the consensus pick between you and everybody you know about which player the Seahawks will take? Well, the consensus pick on NFL Draft Database is Tyler Booker. I don't think that's the pick. I'm like pretty sure that's not the pick. I think increasingly, I think it's Gray Zabel. That's my guess. That's been a pretty common name mocked to Seattle. There's some, Daniel Jeremiah had Gray Zabel going 16 to the Cardinals in I think one of his last mocks. I'm just not sure I see the Cardinals going offensive line given the clear problems they have on defense. Their pass rush is bad. I don't think Darius Robinson helped them last year. I was never high on Darius Robinson for what it's worth. And so I think another edge rusher seems really likely to me. But I think Gray Zabel is a pretty decent bet. There's not a lot of smoke around Donovan Jackson, but I think he's at least as good of a pick for them there. And outside of that, I think Nick Emmanwori, as I did the show yesterday on visits and how important visits, they've met with Nick Emmanwori now multiple times, 30 visit, combine visit. He plays one of the most important positions in Mike Macdonald's defense, and I think that's something to take seriously. A number of folks have had Jahad Campbell mocked to the Seahawks, the linebacker. Obviously, linebacker is an important position for Mike Macdonald's defense as well. He and Nick Emmanwori are in some way a similar kind of pick in that they're elite athletes at their position. That's a position that's not a super glaring need, but there is a role to play potentially. I think there's more of a role to play at safety than there is at linebacker. Tyrese Knight is the assumed starter and started for a lot of the season last year. They don't have a third safety that is assumed to be like they did sign Bell from the Browns, but that's a guy that's never played more than like a few hundred snaps. I don't think he's guaranteed that spot any more than Kayvon Wallace was guaranteed that spot when he was signed to a cheap deal. Nick Emmanwori is a guy that could come in and be a centerpiece of your defense. So I think those are two other guys that are somewhat commonly mocked to the Seahawks. From there, a lot of people are starting to go to wide receiver, and I just don't see it. I think if they pick a wide receiver in the first round, that's pretty close to an F grade. Doesn't matter who it is. Doesn't matter how good the player is. That is not how you're going to build the team you say you want to build. You cannot sign zero impact offensive linemen in free agency and also really sign no new nose tackles or defensive linemen in free agency. Like you got an edge rusher in DeMarcus Lawrence, but I'm talking about interior guys. And Jaron Reed was already here, so I'm not counting him. You can't do that, and then with your first pick in the draft, go receiver. Like, you can't do that. Like, I will absolutely roast the pick if they pick a wide receiver in the first round. Awful, awful decision if they do that. I don't think they're going to do that. So my best bet right now, if I had to put money on it, is Gray Zabel. Don't know. We have about 29 days left until the draft, and we're going to be talking about this all the way until we get there. All right, folks, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you all. Make sure you give this show a like, click subscribe. I will be back with you tomorrow to have some more fun on episode 365. I hope to see all of you there. Make sure you give the show a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I know this is confusing to a lot of folks on YouTube because I am now putting Hawk Blogger Mornings on the audio podcast feed. It will show up twice on YouTube. It will show up once as this live show with video. It'll show up again as an audio podcast. I don't have any control over it. This is how YouTube Music works. They got rid of Google Podcasts. This is now the way it works. So you will see it's in a playlist, if it helps, that says audio podcast. It will not show any video. So you can ignore when that video posts, or you can watch or listen to it if you want without the picture. Certainly understand that. But don't want anyone to get confused. But please, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, leave a 5-star review. I would really, really appreciate it. All right, folks, take care. I will see you all tomorrow. Until then, I'm Brian Nemhauser. This has been episode 364 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take